just getting to the part of giving you a little bit of a foreshadow here about what we're doing. First, I'll talk about some background issues that have to do with, a little about my personal relationship with the Sutra, where this Sutra comes from, and then the issue of the feminization of Kanon, so something about who this figure of Kannon in the 10-line Kanon Sutra is. And then in the second part, my plan is to work through it line by line. And then we'll have a short break, and then there'll be breakout sessions. In the breakout sessions, I want to tell you now a couple discussion starters for you so you can be aware of that. Foreshadow again. One thing is, what was one important takeaway for you from this talk that we're just about to go into? And the second thing is, what is still unclear about the 10 line? Because then when we come back together after the breakout, then we will have a chance for some Mondo, aka Q&A. Now, one thing that I won't talk about in this hour that we have for the Dharma talk is the chant of boundless compassion. Sorry, Rinsen. Rinsen suggested I might address that. It is a commentary on the 10 line that was written by Hogan Bays that a number of groups use as a translation of the 10 line. And I'd rather focus on my own translation of the sutra. And if you'd like, we could spend a little time with the chant of boundless compassion in the Mondo portion of the workshop. So, 10 line, life-prolonging Kanon Sutra. The life-prolonging aspect there, by the way, was added fairly late, probably in the 17th century in Tokugawa, Japan. So for most of its life, this sutra has been known as the 10-line Kanon Sutra. And this translation goes like this: Kanzeon, Namo Buddha, one with Buddha cause, one with Buddha affinity, Buddha Dharma Sangha affinity, constancy, joy, self-purity, mornings Nen Kanzeon, evenings Nen Kanzeon, Nen through a rising mind, Nen not apart from this mind. You'll see a number of loanwords there, and we'll be explaining those as we go along. It seemed, as I was working on the translation, that adding a few loanwords to the loanwords already in the various versions, like Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, being loanwords, just are more accurate, basically. So this sutra and this teaching of compassion and Kanon also have deep roots and resonance in the Zen tradition. And so as a way of acknowledging that, I just want to offer this old case to you as also a segue into our main topic. This is from Da Hui's Shobogenzo. A monk asked Guizong. Guizong was a successor of Matsu. The monk said, "Are there no expedient methods to enable a student to gain access?" Guizong said, "The power of Kanon's wondrous wisdom can free the world from suffering." Echoes of the Heart Sutra, right? The monk asked, "What is the power of Kanon's wondrous wisdom?" The master did this. Tapped the lid 3 times. And then he asked, "Do you hear?" The monk said, "I hear." Guizong said, "Why don't I hear?" The monk had no reply. So Guizong picked up his staff and chased him out of the room. We'll come back to that at the end, I think. So now a little background. First of all, I've been chanting and working with this sutra for 40 years, but really probably mostly in the past, 5 or 10. It's become more and more an important part of my own personal practice. We did chant it some back in the 80s with 70s and 80s with Katagiri Roshi. It's not part of a formal Soto liturgy, but it is something that is chanted in various services. So not part of morning or evening service, but special services. And when I was at Bukokuji in Japan, one day a month was Kannon Sama Day. And we would chant the sutra, I think 36 times if memory serves. It's usually chanted in multiples of 3 and 9, up to 108 times or more. But we would, and people from the neighborhood, lots of people would come in, and Tangen Roshi would put on his finest kesa, and he had been donated many fine cases, so he had these wonderful golden kesas with paracels and all that. And he would give a very wonderful general talk. And then the people from the neighborhood, mostly older women, would offer a meal for the monks. So it was a very special occasion for us. We were mostly living on rice and pickles, and they would bring us some, things like rolls and coffee and things like that, which was quite a novelty back then. And as I said, in these last few years, after really I finished the koan curriculum and I received Inka Shome, I have been focusing more and more on this, actually. And due to life circumstances and just this sutra, it's given me kind of the bug. And I've recently come to the point where I really think that this 10-line sutra could be the whole path for someone. It could be, it's really an amplified refuge chant. And by doing this kind of chanting, it's possible to enter, a deep state of absorption or stability. It has wisdom built into it, and it also has the possibility for post-Kensho practice really built right into it. So it's really quite a brilliant little piece of work. It's so brilliant, there's lots of folks wonder where it came from. It's probably, it probably comes somewhere early on in the Chinese tradition. There's no trace of it, at least in the Indian tradition, although it's possible that it comes from the Indian tradition. I just see Doan there. I just want to say hi, Doan. Good to see you. Yeah, so probably from the early days in the Chinese tradition, only a few hundred years into the Buddhist history of China. In the 5th century are some of the earliest stories. There are multiple stories. We don't really know, which one is first, but that's how history works. One of the stories, the one I like the most, there's a guy named Wang, and he's going to be executed because he backed the wrong side in a political military thing. He's going to be executed. He was one of the leading generals. Apparently it might be some historical basis to this figure. He's going to be executed in the morning, and he goes to sleep, which is quite interesting, I think. He goes to sleep and he has a dream, and in the dream a strange figure, a strange monk. There's a lot of strange monks in the dreams that come along with Kanon, by the way. This strange monk comes to him and says, if you chant the Kanon Sutra 1,000 times, you'll be spared. And in the dream, Wang, who was a good Buddhist practitioner, but he only knew about the Kanon Sutra, which is a chapter of the Lotus Sutra, which is kind of big. And according to my calculations, to do 1,000 recitations of that chapter of the Lotus Sutra, known as the Kanon Sutra, it would take 4 or 5 days. So he said, well, you're killing me in the morning. I can't do 1,000. So the strange figure in the dream says, oh yeah, well, you don't know the 10-line. So he teaches him the 10-line, and the 10-line can be chanted 1,000 times in 3 or 4 hours if you're really moving along. And so he does, and he's spared. There are many stories of people being spared from horrible fates by reciting the 10-line Kanon. And in fact, one of our great ancestors, Hakuin Zenji, wrote at least a couple different volumes of collections of stories of people from China and Japan that had been spared in this way. One is within a collection called Goosegrass, which is just a cool title. It hasn't been translated as far as I know. And another is the accounts of miraculous effects of the 10-line Kannon Sutra. So Hakuin was a big proponent of it. He became a proponent of it according to Hakuin, and with everything about Hakuin, it's good to say according to Hakuin, because he was quite a storyteller. He was approached by a government minister, and the government minister told him that he had had a dream. And in the dream, a strange figure had appeared and said to him that of the people that were alive right now, Hakuin was probably the best position to help rejuvenate the practice of the 10-line Kannon Sutra. So this government minister came and urged Hakuin to begin teaching the 10-line, and so he did. It was probably being practiced fairly widely in Japan at the time, but Hakuin's advocacy of the sutra led to it being widely practiced, especially among householders, but it's also included in the standard Rinzai morning service. So that's a little background. Now, about this issue of the feminization of Kanon, or who or what is Kanon. Doan asked me to talk about this, and it's connected to the theme of the Ongo that's going on in Toledo about celebrating women in Buddhism. So, important. As you may know, Avalokiteshvara, or Kannon, or Kanzayan, or Kanji Zai, Kuan Yin, etc., a figure with many names, right? Figure with many names, came from India as male, and over the few hundred years in China suddenly became female, and then spread widely in East Asia, mostly as a female figure. Also, as you may have noticed, often bodhisattva figures are presented androgynously, at least to my eye. You know, you look at them, we have the figure that we usually have on our Zendo altar is a Manjusri figure, but you look at it and many people have said, oh, that's a female, figure on the altar. Well, Manjusri is usually thought of as male. So there's an issue there about the gender unclarity, a positive issue, I would say, that we should borrow and use. We get to select elements of this rich narrative and choose which we highlight. So the issue of gender actually, it goes way back in Buddhism to the Buddha. So before I talk about the gender of Kannon, Avalokiteshvara transitioned from male to female. Let me talk a little about the Buddha. As you may know, a Buddha has 32 major marks and 80 minor marks. Tetsugan Sensei, my teaching partner and wife and best friend, found this article, and we had a little discussion about this on the Vine of Obstacles, but she found an article called The Politics of the Buddha's Genitals. You can look that up. It's a great article. Now, of those 32 marks, included in these 32 marks, are the earlobes and the thing on the head and arms that reach down to the knees if you're standing up, webbed hands and feet, things like that. And also included is something that's usually translated as a sheathed penis. Now, what the heck? I've long wondered, what the heck is a sheathed penis? Well, this author of this article, The Politics of Buddha's Genitals, also wondered about that. Let's see, where's this guy's name? Bhante Sugato, and he dug into the Pali sources to see what was being talked about. And here's his conclusion about this sheathed penis. He says, The idea that the genitals have been placed into a cavity rather than being covered with a sheath fits much better with his textual analysis. The original purpose was to establish gender ambiguity. It is inescapable, he says, that whatever the reading of the Pali, according to those texts, the Buddha did not have normal, he has quotes, genitals. And the only reading actually supported by a canonical text is that the Buddha was intersex. Then he says, and his genitals looked like a woman's. It's very interesting that although he's a pretty progressive minded here, Bhante Sugata, when he still calls the Buddha by his, and so I propose, that we call the Buddha by, they and them. That's a lot more fitting. The Buddha, of course, isn't around to say how he wants to be. There, I did it. How they want to be identified, but with genitals that appeared like a woman. So, what does that make you then? It's intersex at least. The Chinese also is kind of interesting, the way the Chinese presented in Chinese characters. One of the dictionaries has the 5 characters as the male organ withdrawn, or a well-retracted male organ. They can't quite get away from identifying a male organ that isn't actually there, it seems. Literally the characters, this is my rendering, would be the high and tapered peak of the male organ is hidden in the treasury storehouse. Treasury storehouse is the same character as in Shobo Genzo, the treasury of the true Dharma eye. So we have that tradition of gender ambiguity in going way back to the Buddha. There's an interesting article, by the way. I'll be offering a few articles as we go along here because we don't have time to go into all the detail about stuff. So there's a recent thing in Tricycle, Sex and Gender Fluidity in Tibetan Buddhism, which is a nice piece. Also in our Zen tradition, early Zen master Da Sui was asked, what is the mark of a great person? Of these 32 marks, what is the mark of a great person? Da Sui said, they don't stick signs on their groins. I'm not making that up. It's real. That's also from the Dawe Shobo Genzo. They don't stick signs on their groins. And then Kanon. Returning to Kanon, there's a very important story about this transformation, the transmogrification of Avalokiteshvara in China. Also from the 5th century, so we're back slightly pre-Bodhidharma, in comparing the Zen tradition there. So this is the Princess Miaoshan, and this was a young woman. The story's about a young woman who, her father was the king, of course, she's princess, and her father had 2 other daughters, but he wanted all of them to get married, of course. That's what, her role in the Confucian hierarchy would be, to get married and have babies and take care of her husband and her mother-in-law and everybody. And Miaoshan was like, doesn't sound like a life I want to lead, So, women in patriarchal cultures have long had that issue, and in Europe, many women chose to be nuns for that reason. You could have some education and meaning in life other than by, popping out babies and doing what other people want you to do. So Miaoshan was of this like mind, and so she refused to get married. This enraged her father, who gave her some Herculean kind of tasks to do, which she completed easily, and then ran away and went to a monastery and practiced with other women for some time, and he found out where she was. So her father sent his military to the monastery and killed them all, including his own daughter. So she died, and She went into the afterworld. Strangely, she went to hell. So this is a very mixed kind of story, I'd say. She went to hell, presumably, in one of the versions of that I saw, because she hadn't fulfilled her duty to her family. But in hell, she basically raised hell. So she converted all the beings in hell to the Dharma and preached wisdom, and compassion, meditation, precepts, and suddenly all the beings in hell were just having a great time. They weren't suffering anymore. So the underlings in hell went to Lord Yama, the figure that is the boss of hell, and said, "We can't have her here. We can't do our job of tormenting these beings." So Yama sends Miaoshan back to the human world. And in the human world, so she's kind of this liminal figure. In the human world, she, returns to her practice. And during her practice, she finds that her father is sick. This is the guy who killed her. She finds out that her father is sick, so she disguises herself as a mysterious figure and goes to visit him. And she tells him that you're going to have to find somebody with no anger who will give you their hands and eyes. And then she tells him where he can find such a figure. Then she goes back to her monastery. And that's where the father is told to send people. So he sends his people there. She gives them her own hands and eyes in order to be ground up as a medicine. The father finds out that it was his daughter who made this sacrifice and goes to visit her, and then she transforms into this white-robed Kanon figure. Then gradually this story spread, very popular story, still I'm told, among Chinese, traditional Chinese, Buddhist Chinese people. And, it had a very profound impact on Chinese culture and the Buddha Dharma, because it offered a path for women and householders to practice. And she, as a representative, especially of the Ten Line, became a very countercultural influence in what became a very, established and male monastic order. Even though in China there were many female monastics compared to how many there are today, but especially through the early dynasties, many, as in hundreds of thousands of nuns, as well as several 100,000 male monks. Great source for as much as you can imagine about all of this is by a wonderful woman scholar, Chunfeng Yu, Kuan Yin, the Chinese transformation of Avalokiteshvara. Incredible scholarship, by the way, incredibly detailed, rigorous scholarship on these issues from my amateur point of view. Okay. So that's a little about the background of Kuan Yin, the role in the Zen tradition and Buddhist tradition generally, the transmogrification of Kanon into a female figure, the general gender ambiguity of Buddha and Bodhisattva figures. This is an important issue, by the way, because one of the points of it's an important issue in terms of the practice of the Ten Line, because one of the points of the practice is really to embody Kanon. And so for people who don't identify in this kind of dominant way, the male form, becoming Kanon provides additional hurdles if the understanding is that Kanon is male. But Kanon is this very body, however it is. That's the point. One of the points. Okay, let's see. back to, are there no expedient methods to enable a student to gain access? The power of Kanon's wondrous wisdom can free the world from suffering. So let's look at the title and then the 10 lines. Yeah, 10-line life-prolonging Kannon Sutra. So the 10-line sutra is a Nembutsu practice. Nembutsu means a mindfulness or a remembering of Buddha, and also going way back in the tradition. This remembering the Buddha is one of the standard meditation subjects that practitioners might take up, along with the breath, for instance. But it's very popular and continues to be very popular in Japan. The most common form of it probably is the mindfulness of Amitabha Buddha. So Namu Amida Butsu would be the formulation. My root teacher, Katagiri Roshi, was born into a Pure Land family, and so his first practice was with Namu Amida Butsu. And when he was a young person, drafted into the Japanese Air Force toward the end of World War II, he tells stories which he would laugh about, where he would be at the airfield. He never left Japan, but he was working, to support the airplanes. And when there would be an American air raid, he said just before the air raid, everybody would be going, "Long live the Emperor! Long live the Emperor! Die for the nation!" And then the bombs would start falling, and everybody would jump in the foxholes and go, "Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu." So it was like his default practice, I think, through his whole life, actually. And there is a lot of that mixing with Nembutsu practice and the Zen tradition as well. So, for example, one of our other great ancestors, Huang Longjin, who is in the Linchi Rinzai lineage that Dogen received and transmitted in Japan through Eisai, that Rinzai lineage, which only survives actually in modern Soto tradition. Huang Longjin said, "When a purifying crystal is dropped into turbid water, the water cannot but clarify. When remembrance of Buddha, Nembutsu, is cast into the confused mind cannot but become Buddha. Buddha being unconfused, turbid water clears of itself." So, again, we'll be focusing on the English. Many of you may know and practice the 10-line in its Japanese pronunciation, which is, I think, fine too. And I also think it's helpful to know what the words mean, really, whether you practice it in the Japanese pronunciation of the characters or in English translation. So I'm not going to be going much into the translation itself, but I did a workshop earlier this year for Boundless Way, and there's something you can find on YouTube that goes more into those details with a PowerPoint, so you can see the characters. The True Intention of Buddha as an Ancestor, a seminar on Zen in translation. The last half really focuses on the 10-line. So the first line, Kanzei on, Kanzei on. One thing to notice right away is this curious thing. We have a sutra called the Eme Juku Kannon Gyo, or the 10-line life-prolonging Kannon Sutra. And then the first line is Kanzei-han. So, like, what? Compassion has many names. And really, this is an artifact of the different layers of how the figure of the term, the Sanskrit term, Avalokiteshvara, was translated into Chinese. Earlier, it was Kanji Zai, or Kanon, which we find in the Heart Sutra, and later it became Kanzeon. So it's interesting in terms of the dreamlike founding of this 10-line sutra, that the first line is of a different level of the archaeological dig than the next line. So I'm not a scholar, I don't know what to make of it, but I noticed this. So Kanzeon. Now, what is Kanzeon, or what does Kanzeon mean? The characters for Kanzeon, 3 characters, right? So they're often translated hearing the sounds of the world, and that works. But both hearing and sounds refer more generally. They're not just the ear organ and the ear consciousness and the objects of the ear. They're also just perception generally. So, and I think that's what's really meant here. It's perceiving world sensations, I would say. So Kanzeon is perceiving world sensations. And also, it's important, and this actually, it's really the first word of the sutra, kan, that character kan, which I'm translating as perceiving. What does that mean? And kan is also the character that's used to translate vipassana, or insight. So, in the Heart Sutra, and here also in the 10-line, wisdom and compassion arise indivisibly. You know, there's no space. In the koan, the monk asks, no expedient methods, the wondrous power of Kanon's wondrous wisdom. Kanon, usually a compassion figure, their wondrous wisdom. Wisdom and compassion are the front and back of the hand. But more than that here, perceiving is about observing reality, seeing things, perceiving things, being things, really, as they are. It's to enter the truth of the moment, just that first word, kan. It's to become the sounds and sights and smells and tastes and bodily sensations and, yes, thoughts. It's to become them, no part left out. In the sights, just the sights. In the sounds, just the sounds. That's what kan is. So it's Kensho. That's what it is. That's what we talk about as Kensho. So it's wisdom right from the beginning. And this is Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing Prajnaparamita, clearly saw that all 5 skandhas, aggregates, are empty, and thus relieved all suffering from the Heart Sutra. Hakuin said, if one is truly awake, then the whole world is Kanon. And this leads to the first of 7 hidden teachings. Disclosing the hidden teaching was not just the title of the workshop. There are actually 7 things that I think are hidden here that I want to share with you. So this is the first. Compassion, Kanon, is not about a particular feeling. We do have that in the Buddha Dharma. It's called karuna. This kind of empathic regard for living beings. It's wonderful, important. But it's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about great compassion, Mahakaruna. It's the Daihi, as for example in the Daihi Shindarani, which you may know. So great compassion is not a feeling. It's becoming the sights and sounds of the world. No gap. So great compassion differs from the other compassion in both its scope and its agency. And I go into more detail about this in an article you can find on my blog, Wild Fox Zen blog, another big ugly myth, Zen lacks a compassion practice. But one of the main things, in addition to its differing, it being great compassion, differing from compassion as it's usually talked about, that it's not a feeling. It's not one feeling. It's just what's happening, essentially. So it differs in scope and agency, but also ordinary compassion is the absence of hatred. Important. Sounds good. Great compassion is the absence of ignorance. So it is being awake. Ordinary compassion is the absence of hatred. Great compassion is the absence of ignorance. And these just aren't my ideas, by the way. You can find them in the Great Compendium commentary of the Mahayana. There's actually, in this Great Compendium, there are 8 differences between great compassion and ordinary compassion. I'm just focusing on that one. Well, scope and agency are 2 more, but for today, just that. So, kanzeon, perceiving world sensations. That's the practice. So, second line, Namo Buddha. That's in the Japanese translation, or the Japanese version, we say Nembutsu. Namu is a borrowed term from Sanskrit. And the reason it's often translated as refuge, in my opinion, refuge just isn't strong enough. So, and refuge is like this sense of going someplace that's safe. That's nice, but Namu is to really throw ourselves into the Buddha's world. To really become the Buddha's world, however it is. Like Miaoshan went into hell. A hell of a refuge. It's not exactly a refuge. It's not some nice place. Not only a nice place. It's being willing to go wherever is necessary to uplift living beings. So I prefer Namo to refuge, borrowed term from Sanskrit, as I said. The word Namo itself means to submit oneself to bow to, make obeisance, pay homage. That would be another way to translate it. An expression of complete commitment, reverence, devotion, and trust. So again, refuge just seems a little weak. In the refuge formula, that the Japanese expression of that is Namu Kie. Kie is just like a magnifier. So Namo Kie is to put absolute trust, completely rely on without holding anything back, to have full and perfect trust in the Buddha Dharma. Namu Kie Butsu Namu Kie Ho Namu Kie So, taking refuge in Buddha Dharma Sangha, which is where we're going in a moment here. Third line, one with Buddha cause, one with Buddha affinity. That's the fourth line. That's the Yobutsu in and Yobutsu en in the Japanese pronunciation. So, I forgot one really important thing here. Let me just go back a little bit. What we're doing here, yeah, this is important. Lines 1 through 6, they define the body of Kanon. Okay? That's lines 1 through 6. And lines 7 through 10 express the function of Kanon. So the body and the function. And what we're doing now is it's both instructional and performative. It's unfolding what the body of compassion and of great compassion is. So the body of compassion, kanzeon, perceiving world sensations. Second line, wholehearted, complete refuge in Buddha, in awake. What Buddha means, awake. Third line, recognizing that and being one with awake cause, and with cause and affinity that I'm working with here, with one with Buddha cause, one with Buddha affinity. Cause and affinity refer to the primary cause and secondary cause in general Buddha Dharma karma theory, essentially. So there's nothing that's composed of just a single cause. Everything has primary causes and secondary causes. Compassion, the body of Kanon, is composed of Buddha as the cause and the secondary cause, as the cause and affinity, both the direct and indirect causes. It's also significant that in our Zen tradition, this term, sometimes the primary cause, secondary cause, is the Japanese for that is inen, and a old case, a koan, especially a koan, and circumstances that lead to someone's awakening, is just referred to as the inen. So it's the same thing here. And of course, the Buddha cause is the cause of awakening. In the fifth line, in the Japanese Bukpo So En, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha affinity. So not only with Buddha, but the body of great compassion is caused by awakening. The Dharma, the teaching or the how to do it, and the Sangha, the radiant body of all beings in the 10 directions. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha affinity. Sixth line, constancy, joy, self-purity. In the Japanese, Jo Raku Ga Jo. These are the 4 descriptors of nirvana: constancy, joy, self, purity. And through awakening, we get some taste of these 4. And they also are the flip side of the characteristics of samsara, right? Constancy, impermanence, joy, suffering, self, non-self, purity, impurity. So there also, you might be familiar with the guidepost for the Hall of Pure Bliss from Zen Master Hongzhi, and translated in Cultivating the Empty Field, wonderful book by Taigen Leighton. And Zen Master Hongzhi says, by seeking appearances and sound, one cannot truly find the way. This is an interesting reference to the Diamond Sutra, actually, but this phrase, seeking appearances and sound cannot truly find the way, is very frequently used in our Zen tradition. The deep source, he says, of realization comes with constancy, joy, self, and purity. Its purity is constant. Its joy is self. The two are mutually dependent, like firewood and fire. The self's joy or bliss is not exhausted. Constant purity has no end. So that's our 6th line: constancy, joy, self, purity. 4 characteristics of suffering being blown out. And that brings us to our second hidden teaching. The 10 line is a remembering Buddha practice, Nembutsu, where the practitioner becomes Kanon. So, as I have mentioned to some Viners when I was talking to my friend Mado Moore, he said that, and I described this to him, my understanding of the 10-line Kanon, he said, oh, so it's a concise deity yoga visualization. I said, yes, that's what it is. It is a concise deity yoga visualization. It really is. Throughout, and it invites this thoroughgoing insight, perceiving world sensations, refuge in causes and conditions of Buddha, the 3 jewels, and that just by nature is endowed with these 4 characteristics: constancy, joy, self, and purity. And that brings us right away, immediately, to the 3rd hidden teaching here. There's actually signs of fruition of the practice that are built into it. So while you're chanting this, you're embodying the activity of compassion. And when your practice bears fruit, it just naturally leads to this first sign of fruition, which is constancy, joy, self, purity, some taste of those things. This recitation, by the way, can be done anytime, of course. That's why it was so popular among householders and has been, especially in China and Japan. And continues to be, really popular. And because it can be done anytime, in any posture, when you're washing the dishes, when you're walking the dog. You can do it in a sitting meditation pose, but it can be done anytime. So it's something that can be done as a formal part of liturgy, and it's one way to learn how to do it, of course. But the liturgy is just the beginning of the practice, really. It can be done thousands of times a day. So we'll get to the other signs of fruition as we go along here. And then, as I said, so the first 6 lines define the body of Kanon. And so also, I think, this is a traditional understanding of the 2 parts of this short sutra. So any translation has to accommodate that understanding, so that, we're in tune, we're in line, we're receiving the great tradition, so that what we're doing here is receiving and, enacting the great tradition, and of course working with it. If we can go beyond it, that's fantastic, but our primary responsibility first is to really receive it, digest it, embody it, and then maybe we can go beyond it. But if we are making shit up basically before we've embodied it, or we just taste a little bit of the frosting on the tradition and then go our own way, well, it's kind of questionable, I think, in many ways. So, first part, the body of Kanon. The second part, the function or the practice of Kanon, or the shugyo, we might say, the practice activity of great compassion. And that comes through with the 4 lines: mornings nen kanzeon, evenings nen kanzeon, nen through a rising mind, nen not apart from this mind. So we have this word here, nen, and it's one of the 2 additional loan words that I propose that we borrow for this translation. Nen is a very complex, I don't know, it's so complex, but there's multiple dimensions to it. And any English word that we select highlights just one of those dimensions. And it's for this very reason, for instance, that dharma isn't translated. It's one of our loan words. Nen means thought, it means study, it means moment, it means mindfulness, it means to remember, all of those things. But if you pick any one of those words and plug it into the sutra, you get a one-dimensional kind of take on it. So I think there's a good reason to just use it as nen rather than any of the individual ones. Nen is the character that's usually translated as mindfulness, and that horse is totally left the barn. So we're not going to have any possibility of saying well, it's not exactly mindfulness. It's mindfulness is going. But in terms of, in depth Dharma work, it's important to keep in mind that mindfulness is, one dimension of this notion, and it's not the only one. It's also to remember and embody Buddha. It's a little different than being mindfulness of the carrot, right? Mindfulness of the carrot, there's somebody that's aware of something. And that kind of mindfulness, the Buddha also said, is a practice of suffering. It's a helpful practice, no doubt about it, but it's a practice of suffering. And what we're invited to do here is to receive this wondrous power of wisdom, of compassion and wisdom together. So mornings nen, kanzeon, not hard to understand. And this is about the continuity of practice, of course. Evenings nen, kanzeon. So the sutra can be recited through the morning, through the evening, through the night, A lot of folks in their older years waking up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., So it can be just a practice session, just taking up the sutra. Kanzeon Namo Buddha. all night long if necessary, drifting in and out of sleep with the sutra. Perceiving world sensations, evening, nen, kanzeon, through the day, through the night. Ninth line, nen nen. So often when there's two characters used together like that, it's also an amplifier. So nen nen is like now, not waiting, now heart, through a rising mind. So often there's a sense in translations that it's sometimes translated as this thought is, this thought arises in mind. And also with the next line, not apart from this mind. But what we can get there is actually a confusion about what awakening is. That instead of I am not it in truth is me. We can translate it to perpetuate the confusion that I am it. That this thought I'm having is it. That's reversed. So what's really being taught here is to perceive world sensations, no part left out. Be the sensations. And just to touch again on our great koan tradition, case 80 in the Blue Cliff record, a monk asked Jiaozhou, even a newborn child has the sixth consciousness. No, sixth consciousness is the dividing mind. Jiao said, throwing a ball on rushing waters. Even a newborn child has sixth consciousness. No, Jiao said, throwing a ball on rushing waters. The monk returned to Tozhu, another great teacher living at the time of Jiao, and said, what does throwing a ball on rushing waters mean? Tozhu said, nen nen, it never stops flowing. Nen nen, never stops flowing. So that's the spirit of these two lines, nen nen, through a rising mind. Nen nen, not apart from this mind. Fourth hidden teaching. Well, I've already given this one away. This is continuity anyway. The fourth hidden teaching. Like all of Zen, it's hidden in the open. To use the word hidden is a little questionable because it's right there to see. But you have to have eyes to see it. So I suppose in a sense hidden. It's like looking for your keys when they're sitting on the shelf. Unless you see them, you don't see them. Fourth hidden teaching, continuity. This is the host within the host, by the way. It's not some kind of hyper-individuality saying, I am it. It's being the host within the host. And the fifth hidden teaching, as I said, this was the one I gave away. You are not it. It, in fact, is you. That is, you are not Kanon. Kanon, in truth, is you. Sixth hidden teaching, the simultaneous instructional and performative nature of this sutra. That's why the translation is important. And just to recite it in Japanese, I think is, it can be powerful, just the syllables, it can be a great powerful chant. But unless you know what you're being instructed to do, it's just one part of it. It's simultaneously instructional and performative. So you're doing it as you're reciting it. It tells us how to be Kanon while we're being Kanon. So it's also kind of a Zen joke, gotta say. It's not really primarily explanatory, really. The word compassion does not appear in it. So it's thought of as a compassion sutra, but it's instructive and performative of great compassion, but it actually doesn't describe it or explain it, and it's not primarily inspirational in that sense. The intention isn't to inspire us. It's to perform compassion right now. So, this, and the seventh and final hidden teaching, it's the integration. I used to say, just like last week, I used to say that it's the integration of devotion, absorption, and insight, or kensho. But as I've been mulling this over a bit and talking with students some about this, the idea of a devotional practice, I think, is it's a little funny, because at least for me, I was a kid raised Catholic in a small Polish Catholic parish about 20 miles from here. And the idea that you're devoted, that it's a devotional practice, then it's as if it's something outside, and that's really antithetical to the purpose of the teaching. So, although it's really a practice, a very heart-centered practice about Kanon, about great compassion, I'm hesitant to say that it's devotional. But it is a Nembutsu practice. It is a remembering Buddha practice. That's what I'd say. It's certainly an absorption practice, just that. And I think actually that the Japanese pronunciation of the characters is very powerful for this. And the English can be very powerful too. A student with the Vine of Obstacles works with this, walking to work a half hour and back every day, with each step, actually, one of the words, each step. In home practice, also householder practice, one of the things to do is to be creative when working with it. You don't have to do it the same way that it's done at the temple. You can do one syllable per breath, one word per breath, one line per breath. You can do it forward and backward. You can be creative and keep it alive. That's what people have been doing. And largely women in China and Japan have maintained, household women have maintained this practice through China and Japan. There was a whole movement in China, the White Lotus Society. Most often, lay movements throughout Buddhist history have their source in monasteries, and then they find a lay expression, a householder expression. But the White Lotus Society in China was very powerful and was independent of the male monastic orders. And it was very influential for several hundred years until, as things go, they were advocating for a regime that lost favor, and they wound up being outlawed and gradually disappeared. So we come back to, are there no expedient methods to enable a student to gain access? Well, in a sense, if you're looking for an expedient method, you're missing it. But Guizhang plays along. The power of Kanon's wondrous wisdom, which is what's happening right now, can free the world from suffering. The monk asked, "What is it? Where is the place where there's no heat and cold? What is the power of Kanon's wondrous wisdom? I want it." That's the self going out to get the thing, get the practice. And Guizhang taps the cauldron 3 times. Hear that? I got it, I heard it. Guizhang, why didn't I hear it? Why didn't I hear it? The monk made no reply. So Guizhang showed him great compassion and chased him out with a staff. Let's briefly review and then take a little break and then breakout sessions. First hidden teaching. It's not about feeling compassion. It's about being great compassion. We like that country song on the Vine, love is not something you have, it's something you do. It goes with this one, first hidden teaching. Second hidden teaching. The 10 line is a remembering Buddha practice, Nembutsu. where the practitioner becomes Kanon, so a concise deity yoga visualization. Third hidden teaching, there are within it circular signs of fruition. And the first one is constancy, joy, self, and purity. I didn't highlight these, but I'll hit them when I'm going through with the review. You might not need the review, but I need the review. The fourth hidden teaching is continuity. That's the second sign of fruition, when there is that continuity of practice of perceiving world sounds. It's embedded in the sutra, in that instruction, morning nen kanzeyan, evening nen kanzeyan. The fifth hidden teaching, you are not it, it in fact is you. Nen through a rising mind. So, you are not Kanon, in truth is you. The sixth hidden teaching, it is simultaneously instructional and performative. It tells us how to be Kanon while we're being Kanon. And the seventh hidden teaching, integration of Nembutsu practice, insight, and non-dual wisdom. So, Kanzeyan Namo Buddha. One with Buddha cause, one with Buddha affinity. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha affinity. Constancy, joy, self, purity. Mornings, nen, kanzeyan. Evenings, nen, kanzeyan. Nen through a rising mind. Nen not apart from this mind. And then with every practice ending with the dedication, may this merit extend universally to all, so that we with all beings realize the Buddha way together. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, maha prajna paramita.